and steel can be forged over, but who can change our love? Iron and steel can perish in time, but our love must remain forever. So this is easy to follow, what's going on. You can see how Brahms, reacts to the emotion, to the situation of the text. Question?
Where was this from?
1868. So both of these were 1868. last composer that we are going to study in this section on leader is the composer Hugo Wolf. And so Wolf is a composer at the end of the Romantic period and is actually involved in this era that is known as post-Romanticism. So you think of Richard Strauss and Wolf, Gustav Mahler. So this is the end of the 19th century, last 10 years, and first 10 years of the 20th century. And the post-Romantics were writing music that was, taking the emotionalism to the extreme. And so they're very intense. And the end of the Romantic period saw then this increasing use of chromaticism, and it took it to the point that things modulated so much that it kind of, you were getting away from the idea of what was your home key. And so this is something that's seen as leading then to the developments in the second decade of the 20th century and then into the 1920s with the new techniques that Arnold Schoenberg developed that were known as serialism, in which the idea of tonality was systematically abolished by the use of themes that he would construct, which he called tone rows. And it was the basic idea that all 12 tones of the octave would be treated equally. So there wasn't one tone that served as tonic. So it had, very much a mathematical element to it. But Hugo Wolf is seen as like a forerunner to this. Schoenberg and his two students, Alban Berg, Anton von Webern, were composing in Vienna. And so they're known as the New Viennese School, or the 20th century Viennese School. And this is in contrast to the Viennese classical composers. So it's one thing, all right, so post-Romantic. Another thing with post-Romanticism is that whereas the beginning of the Romantic period, in looking at Beethoven and the idea of the individual, overcoming their fate. Beethoven made the statement, "I'll be the master of my own fate." So there's a sense of, of optimism that through, the strength of the will, that you can overcome adversity and see it through. By the end of the 19th century, though, it was much more pessimistic. And there was much more a fatalistic idea of that we actually are the victims of our own fate, in that, in a sense, we are pinned to this wheel of fate, and we can't do anything about it. And so you have that I mentioned the term Weltschmerz, that world pain, that world weariness, the end of the cycle element. You'll read that term, the French term for end of the cycle. And so at any rate, that's kind of the background for Wolf. So we'll put here. So this was the age of Sigmund Freud, and you have his principles of the forces that drive human behavior and the subconscious element And so we'll see that that is something too that Wolf is interested to examine, is the subconscious forces in the human personality. And so this also was, a time of change. The camera was invented in the middle of the 19th century, so visual artists were released from the role of capturing a realistic image because you could take a photograph. And so we start to see visual artists that experiment with non-realistic representations. And so in France in the 1870s, Claude Monet develops a style that was dubbed Impressionism, and that style is one that is taking an external point of view of objects. They were painting objects that were outdoors and were very much fascinated by the play of light on subjects. So if you've been to the Art Institute in Chicago, there's a series of paintings by Monet of a haystack, and painting it at different times of the day, and just seeing how just the way that the light changes from morning to noon to afternoon and so forth can make subtle changes in the appearance of the same object. And so you see images like the play of light on water, and creating these hazy, out of focus, non-realistic representations of things in nature. So that was one thing that was happening in France in the last quarter of the 19th century. The German direction that headed off into then what is going to be the music of the new Viennese school is the type of extreme emotional expression that's known as expressionism. And so those two ideas were kind of, in a sense, they occurred at the same time, Impressionism and Expressionism. But Expressionism had to do with this emphasis on intense emotional expressions which were driven by these subconscious forces. So, one of the composers in the post-romantic who was one of the leaders in this was Richard Strauss and his epic opera Salome, which was incredibly shocking. It was premiered in the first decade of the 20th century. And then other types of movements that had to do with getting away from the idea of the romantic, German romanticism of Wagner and Liszt. We start to see that happening. And so, the end of the Romantic era has this extreme emotionalism that we see with the post-romantic. So Hugo Wolf is someone who is in that type. So. So Arnold Schoenberg is the leader of this new type of composing. And then his two students, Berg and von Webern, Anton Webern, are the three that are associated with this style of writing. They all have different qualities as far as their particular compositions. As far as how austere they were. or how they would write, tone rows that would have thirds that made it sound more, tonal, somewhat. But Wolf is seen as someone who was leading into that. So that is one important characteristic of Wolf's music, is the chromaticism that he uses. So in total, he wrote over 300 songs. They were written in about a 10-year span. Wolf suffered from syphilis, and the medication for that was awful, and so he died incurably insane. And so he was going in and out of these phases of not being able to write. And musicologists say that the total number of days that he was able, to write songs was a little over 500 days. And so when he was writing songs, then he was very productive. But he was kind of going in and out. Wolf was a critic who wrote for Viennese newspapers, and he was a very outspoken critic of Wagner, of Brahms. And so he was someone who supported Wagner and that whole idea of the music of the future. And so we're going to put here chromaticism. So he's one of the main leaders of the anti-Brahms group in Vienna at the end, the 1880s. So this chromatic element is important. Another element that we'll see in his songs, and it's his songs that he's remembered for. Wolf composed a few other types of works, but there's like a string quartet, but it's his art songs that are by far the most important of his compositions. What he would do in these is that he would write vocal parts that were independent from the piano part. So that has a sense of kind of counterpoint to it. So another thing that you'll see in his works is his attitude toward the text, which is he chose very high quality poetry, and he viewed himself as being in service to the poet. And so he entitled his songs Poems for Voice and Piano. And he would place the name of the poet on top of his name.